And next up, this is actually my last duty for the afternoon. I do have to jet after this, so we've got a plan B, and it's a very good plan B because I'm going to introduce the moderator of the next panel, and this person will also do some closing remarks for you. And it's Connie McCutcheon, and I've known Connie for a number of years. We actually met in the city of Toronto. We worked on open data together there, and we were quite symmetrical indeed. And I often say to Connie, she's the best boss I never had. And she moved on to Niagara region and has done some wonderful things, not just in open data, but all kinds of different things. She's involved with MISA, and you are currently president, I believe, of MISA. See, you're nodding. As well, you're involved with the Canadian Open Data Society, and you are the new Director of Communications for Go Open Data. So welcome aboard on that job. And to sign off for everybody, I want to just say thank you for putting up with me today. It's been a wonderful conference. And I'll do a newsroom kind of pass off to Connie as the reporter here from the floor of Go Open Data. Passing you over to Connie, and this will make you laugh. It's Keith McDonald reporting. Take it away, Connie, and thanks again, all the folks for listening. Have a great final session.
Bye, Keith, and thank you for those kind words. And yes, Keith. So everyone, wow, good afternoon. What a day we've had. This is amazing. So welcome everyone to the final session of GOOD23. Joining me for this panel, Open Futures, is Anna Brandusescu, Steve Czajka, and Tracey Lauriault. Cyrus unfortunately had something unexpected occur that prevented him from joining us today, but onward we'll go. In this session, Open Futures, we will explore future directions that hopefully will assist us in bridging the open divide. Each speaker will provide us with a short introduction of themselves, and then they will have about 5 minutes to chat with us about our open future. When all the speakers are complete, we will go over to the Q&A. You know how to use the button. For the remainder of the session, we'll have those questions. So I'm really hoping that you guys will challenge us with some good questions. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Anna. Anna, would you please introduce yourself and provide some key points for us to consider as we ponder our open future?
Yeah, for sure. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Connie. Nice to meet you and nice to see everybody. Thank you to the organizers for having me. So my name is Anna Brandusescu. I used to lead research and policy projects on government transparency and digital rights to advance the open movement at the World Wide Web Foundation. As the 2019-2021 McConnell Professor of Practice, I examined AI policy and public investments in Canada. I also conducted a study on facial recognition technology in this country and Canada and testified on its use and impact for the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. And then I went back to do a PhD to research political power and privatization and the scale of public and private governance of AI. So taking it to open futures, for me, open futures is open government being open about issues and failures. And it's also about having open research. So in my intro, I will briefly share my thoughts on two things: access to information and whistleblower protection. Access to information is not open government because we always have to knock at the department or agency door to ask for that access. The door may be open, might be partially open, like a glass door where you see parts of the interior, but not everything because you cannot enter, or the door may stay closed. Yet so much important information is found in successful access to information or freedom of information requests. We need to work towards proactive disclosure of documents. Public disclosure of important documents and data like procurement allowed me to discover public investments in AI. We need more relevant data and documents, especially regarding emerging technologies, to understand how government adopts and deploys them, who builds them, who funds them, and why. This includes looking at new ways procurement is being changed. So tracking and making public to the public free offers like software trials and testing of technology in government offered by vendors. So this kind of knowledge can help people better understand the business models. And the second point I want to raise is the need for better whistleblower protection, an important mechanism for addressing and being open about issues. This means better whistleblower protection for both government and private sector workers. And here, lots of work on this has already been done. So the 2017 House of Commons report review of Public Servants Disclosure Protection Act has great recommendations that, this work needs to align with provinces and territories. Canada doesn't do great on this in terms of its act, so we can use the open futures to address making these kinds of amendments to our legislation. And for the private sector in the US, a while ago, Trillium Asset Management, for example, their work requesting the board of directors for a third-party review of current policies at Google to adopt better whistleblower protection. So it's possible for this kind of ask to come from shareholders, despite big tech or business models that are problematic. And then also at the state level in the US, the Silence No More Act in California passed in May 2021 to ensure that workers who experience workplace discrimination or harassment get heard and supported, which is again also important. And I'm going to keep it shorter, but would love to discuss this and other things in our session. So in brief, open future means changing cultures, learning from mistakes, and overcoming fear. So these are all part of our open futures. And some of this has been mentioned already in the last panel. And I would like to take, some of that forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Anna. You know what? It always amazes me, right? At the end of the day, fear is what stops us so much from being open and authentic, right? And having that proactive disclosure. It's just, you know what, if I could do anything, my magic thing would stop everybody from being so afraid. So excellent. Thank you very much. I'm going to move over now to Steve. Steve, would you give a short bio of yourself and chat with us for a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so happy Friday, everybody. We're in the home stretch here for GOOD23, so that's awesome. My name is Steve Czajka. I'm the Senior Manager of Smart City Strategy at Telus Business. And so I have about 20 plus years of experience, including things like GIS and data analytics, data visualization, both 2D and 3D, smart city, privacy, policy development, ITS, V2X, sorry for the acronyms, digital twins, and of course, open data. So some of my former open data experience includes things like I led a city to become one of the first 4 or 5 cities in Canada to launch an open data portal in 2010. So we were kind of pioneers back then. Also, the same city was able to launch an open data policy in 2015. And then we were a handful of governments in Canada to adopt something called open by default in 2021 at a city level. So, so some of the roles I formerly had was basically a GIS manager, manager of data and visualization studio, smart city manager, and of course, GIS instructor at McMaster University for about 8 years. So I will keep that short and pass it on back to Connie.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. And you know what? It's been awesome, you know what, watching you and the groundbreaking, right? We've been on this journey for a while, right? Yeah, it's awesome. So with that, I'm going to go over to Tracey Lauriault. Tracey, you've got, you know what, more than a few minutes. You get a bit more time now. We've always chuckled, right? So Tracey, give your introduction, please.
Okay, so a little introduction of myself and about some of the issues that I'm interested in talking about as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Wonderful. Do we go back to Steve and say, Steve, did you want to add a few things for your issues? Because you introduced yourself, but you didn't put your issues on the table.
Well, I will. I'd be happy to do so. So,
okay, sorry,
two points
Connie,
that I want to make. Just
chance.
2. I'll keep it short. I'll keep it brief. Just 2. So the first one is, so I've transitioned from the public sector back into the private sector. So originally I was in the private sector and moved to the public sector, and now I'm back in where I started in the private sector. And so I'm going to give you 2 perspectives, which I think are really valuable for most of the people in this room here. So as a publisher, I really felt that the value of open data over the last decade, that, as Connie, you mentioned, I mean, it's a heavy lift, right? Like, doing this is not easy. And so I think the value of open data has been absolutely enormous. I mean, if you just look at one metric alone, just one, which is not transparency, it's not openness, it's not anything like that. If you just look at this from a business perspective and the idea of self-serve open data, that is enormous value for all governments across Canada, because that allowed us to do other things that were more valuable to a city rather than, doing, handing over data to people the old way as opposed to using open data for that. And so the cost savings in that was huge, but then that led us to more, what I found was more data-informed decision-making, which is critical to cities. Education, increasing education for everyone, which led to then data literacy, data journalism, and then of course, the whole point of open data, which is really government transparency and openness. So that's kind of the publishing side of things. That's my perspective from the publishing side. So as I've transitioned back into the private sector, our focus at Telus right now within the smart city area is three things. So transportation and roads, waste in the environment, and safer cities. And so our biggest focus is really in the transportation side, really V2X kind of technology. And I think what I'm seeing now is now a global perspective. So I'm out of the fishbowl, and now I'm looking at the whole thing from 50,000 feet up. And there's a lot of opportunities that lie ahead. And so the opportunities around things like consistency of data. If you're looking at it from a large organization, you're consuming data from different cities, there's a lack of consistency. And that's a huge opportunity for Canada and the globe. Having consistent metadata, having federated open data sites. And then of course, we're going to see a transition from static open data where you publish something once a year or once a quarter or something like that to live open data. And then that is going to transition very quickly to real-time open data as well. So really the goal of this and the biggest opportunity for open data is actually the customer experience, right? So the citizen experience and how they consume open data as well, both locally and globally. So thank you.
Awesome. You know what? Thanks, Tracey, for helping go back to Steve's issues, because you know what, the one that you brought up, Steve, you touched on standards. You would know that's one that, with the lack of, right? We've been dealing with so many years. And I think that's really, it's one of those things that we're not going to be able to have a bright future if we don't fix that. It's so foundational.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome. So with that now, Tracey, over to you.
So my name is Tracey Lauriault. I'm Associate Professor of Critical Media and Big Data in the School of Journalism and Communication at Carleton University. In the open data community, people have known me for a long time, and myself and quite a few others who are here were considered some of the founders of open data in Canada, one of the founders of the G4, starting the first open data listserv, which is Civic Access, starting the first blog, which is datalibre.ca, and then actively being engaged in developing licensing and portal standards and all that good stuff in the early days, and then working with organizations like Open North and the like. My education and background, so not unlike you, Steve, is in GIS, geomatics, and spatial data infrastructures. And this is my segue into the ideas portion. I always stand behind these two maps. There's the Arctic. That's our future. It is melting. There are cables moving in this area. There's an Arctic spatial data infrastructure that's operating. Your children, and great-great-grandchildren, that's their future. That is the climate of the future and the region of the future. And right now in the Arctic spatial data infrastructure, there are 9 countries collaboratively working together, developing an Arctic spatial data infrastructure, integrating their data, including Internet of Things and sensors for navigation, mineral and mining exploration and exploitation, semantic interoperability, the works. It's all happening there, and it's all standards based, and it's mostly all open, and it's all sectors are engaged and involved, but there are national scale leaders here, including Indigenous organizations involved. And then I always keep the Antarctic because the ice is melting there too. Why do I keep the two together? Well, because they're two awesome round maps. but also because of International Polar Year. International Polar Year happens every 50 years. And every 50 years, the actors involved in this, whether they be scientists, researchers, government organizations, come together to discuss what's going on in the poles and to discuss climate change, which were some of the discussions that were earlier. Why are these two things really important for me? Because they are large, complex, social and technological integrated systems. And in the earlier panel, two earlier panels, actually systems were brought up. And so the things that I would like to think of in the future for open data, we've thought about it all, not quite exclusively as a flat thing, but almost as a flat thing. There are data there in a portal, they go into a map, there are metadata. We have licenses and those things, but we haven't thought of it as a broader system, right? Anna's bringing in some of the important political systems, or what I might call data politics in this environment. The spaces that I'm in at the moment, I'm in digital twins. I'm in the smart cities, and as some of you know, I developed the Open Smart Cities Guide and education modules and all kinds of stuff related to that. But I'm also looking at data brokers, and I'm involved in large digital archives. What am I seeing? I'm seeing, at least in digital twins and in smart cities, and of course data brokers, massive transnational corporate actors. Where's our open database of these large transnational corporate data actors? We cannot find a list of data brokers, for example. When I look at digital twins, we're talking about the architecture, construction, and engineering sectors. And when you start looking in those sectors, you start seeing massive, again, multinational companies that are involved in the financialization of construction and housing, but also in the construction of these massive platforms that involve building information management systems, that involve Internet of Things, that involve a whole bunch of smart technologies. And this is not an open space by any which way or means. And they are currently constructing urban digital twins and national digital twins in an environment where it's as if the concept of open data has never come into the fore. And this construct of spatial data infrastructures, which have been around, and even if we think of GEOS, the Global Earth Information Observation Systems of Systems, where they're integrated corporate actors and public sector actors to share the massive stores of Earth observation data, they even collaborate and have something open. These folks have something open. You get to digital twins, and it's a massive enclosure movement. Don't even think of the commons. Let's not even think of data sharing. There's barely interoperability. But that's what's coming, and it's coming fast, and it's a completely different sector that I have never dealt with before in the data space. When you get into smart cities, it's a similar kind of environment, and it's all kinds of interconnected systems, and it's, again, large platform corporate sectors. It's IBM's, it's Siemens, it's Cisco, it's these very, very big actors, and some telecom like Telus and other actors. There's some elements of open and not, but if we go back to the spatial data infrastructure again, and we go back to open science, which was discussed earlier, that's also a system of systems. So how come we haven't learned from the open science world, where they have Internet of Things, they have interoperability, they have open access, they have open data? When you get into data brokers, let's just call it what it is. Let's just call it data capitalism. So how come we don't know? How come they know so much about us and we know so little about them? And how come when I'm currently doing research on data brokers, the databases of data brokers are in the thousands of dollars to get access to them, and we do not track them as actors in terms of specialized companies in the NAICS codes, the National North American Industry Classification System. So they're very, very hard to track. And if we start looking at them just in a media space, mergers and acquisitions are a very big thing in this space. Bell Canada, for instance, just bought Environics Analytics. Environics Analytics was one of the Canadian heroes in geodemographic profile and data brokers. So we're seeing that kind of activity as well. So my world, my question is, how do we begin to bring design justice into the equation? How do we begin thinking of constructs like data feminism Because we don't hear that, but we ought to be considering data feminism in our open data world, because there's very interesting practices in there. How do we think of public good in another context? And then how do we mobilize ourselves as open data actors to get involved in these big data politics conversations that are coming to our cities, provinces, national institutions, etc.?
Awesome, Tracey, lots of great points. I can't help but think, have you thought of what new business models, consortiums,
Yes.
or collaborations might actually help address some of these issues that you brought up?
Yes, certainly for smart, for brokers, forget them. Like there's, you know, we're not going to turn them into friendlies overnight. That's pure data capitalism at its best. And it's hundreds of years old, right? From list companies to marketing companies and so on. For digital twins, yes, but we are talking about land. We are talking about developers of building development, and we are talking about an ecosystem of actors, if you will, who do not even have an incentive to share. They don't care. It's different. The digital twin folks do, not the digital twin, the smart cities folks do, because there's at least an intersection with a government in one way or another, right? There has to be a permit of some kind. There has to, you know, for a smart mobility or something, right? But when it comes to digital twins, I could construct, you know, massive buildings in a city, but my digital twin remains that of the property owner and of the building owner or of the construction company. Why would I share it when I'm creating my own platforms and my own systems? So AutoCAD, yes, and Esri are actors in this space constructing things, but they are doing so in a very, and there's Revit and other open source types of platforms, but it's all being done in an ultra proprietary, and when I say proprietary, I mean property environment. So it's a kind of actors that co-ops and consortiums and collaboratives and other public good types of arguments that we might have in business models, they're by nowhere there yet. And what would be the incentive to do so in the first place for them? Because they can continue to operate without having to do so. Whereas smart cities can't operate in the same way. Cities have some role to play, but not in digital twins.
Interesting. So Anna, you know what? I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this. I'm thinking based on what you were sharing, it's hard enough for the public sector, right, to get there, right? How could, do you have any thoughts on how we might move ahead? New collaborations?
Yes, so like all great points, both Steve, Tracey. I will get to data brokers, but I want to start with like, why did I zoom out? Like I didn't say data once, I think, in my intro. And it was just to look at the systems and the political structures, as Tracey already mentioned, and what that means for us and moving forward, using data as an opportunity or emerging tech to fix things or make them better in terms of in the public sector. And I do go to the public sector because the government is directly accountable to the people. And we don't have that from the private sector as a foremost priority. So an important part of this is, adding to the list of things we don't have is the registries of algorithms used by government, for example, at all levels of government. We have a few cities like Amsterdam who started this process, but you have all these exceptions or exemptions by the usual suspects, law enforcement, national defense, revenue agencies. I really believe we would begin better trust with our governments if they would be, as it was mentioned earlier, the naming and faming to include all of these AI systems from law enforcement, from the CRA in Canada, from the Defense Department, without risking trade secrets or any of that. That's usually like the standard answers, but we know that the abuse of power potential is greatest in those agencies with this technology. So again, data and systems, but we don't even know as a public what AI systems are being used. And I dare to say some of the governments won't even know across the board what AI systems are being used. within each other's institutions. So again, these registries could be a start to creating that transparency and conversation with the public. And again, corporate data is notorious for being closed, and we have organizations like Open Corporates who have been working on this for a long time, and then other newer foundations like Tech Inquiry looking specifically into like AI, the AI space in the US and the military and so on. So and I know I'm missing a bunch, like there's a lot more projects out there on this. The Organized Crime and Corruption Project that's based out of Sarajevo. So there is action and momentum. It's just that it's not an incentive for them to be open in that way. And also there's no benefit. So you have that incentive from governments because they do owe it to the public to have more of a better relationship and building that trust. And sometimes that trust never existed with certain groups of people. And we have to acknowledge that sort of, how do we even get there and recognize failures? So not only celebrated those failures as it was said in the last panel, but how do we just acknowledge them and not hide behind them? Because that is the culture of government, and that will take like a generation, my generation, if not, I may never see this. And this is not me being like a cynical optimist. It's just, it will take time. So again, I went to the Whistleblower Protection Act changes because only one person, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the public sector at the federal level in Canada has actually filed a complaint since that act was put together. So what does that say about the validity and use of that act when people are afraid to speak out in confidential ways? We might as well not have an act and start over. Because it's so this is I do care about that part, right? And then so you have to have these protection mechanisms so people aren't, the fear culture will continue for a while until we can transition to bravery, but we got to have like spaces to share this stuff and not just have people leave and get out because they can't change the system or it's too overwhelming and too big. And yeah, there's this really great book I haven't read yet by Lambden called Data Cartels. It looks really great. So I will just note that because we had a conversation around data brokers. Yeah, so I'm just gonna end there for now.
Yeah, and you know what? I want the brave culture. That's what I'm living for, right? I want to see that brave culture emerge. And I can't help but think, Steve, with your background in both public and private now, right, that you probably have a lot of thoughts to share in this discussion about data models and things like that.
I do. So just to pick up on a point that Anna mentioned about the AI registry. So just kind of stepping back, seeing that decade of open data evolution, if you will. One of my observations has been that the cart kind of came before the horse, and that wasn't intentional. It was just the way that kind of rolled out. So for example, and we do this all the time in society, cars or automobiles came out in the early 1900s. I think it was 50 or 60 years later that seatbelts were invented. It's like, oh, this is a great idea because, cars are hurting people. So when open data first came out, it came before this concept of data ontologies that I mentioned earlier, which is just a fancy word for data standards. And I remember early in my career, like very, very early in my career, I was introduced to something called the municipal reference model. I think Markham was using it. It was a great thing. It sort of laid out like, here's the data model for your city. You plug it in and away you go. The trouble was none of the vendors adopted it. And so none of the cities adopted it, or very few cities adopted it at that time. And so, and that was really a monumental moment, because just imagine if that were implemented at that time, this world would be a much better place today. I think we made a huge fail back then by not adopting that municipal reference model. Looking back at my career, and that's probably going back at least 20 years. And so just to finish this point, so if you look at GTFS, the Google Transit Feed Specification, or which now called the General Transit Feed Specification, that's a standard ontology that everyone can kind of follow. and get behind, and that's doing wonderful things for our world. We need to take that to the next level. The other thing that's missing was this whole idea of data governance maturity. Now, that wasn't around when open data came out, right? That's been in banking and in insurance, and now it's starting to flow into government over the last 5 years or so. There's now data catalog tools, but that wasn't around when open data first came out. The cloud maturity wasn't around when open data first came out, and I would say that most municipalities across Canada are still on-prem with most of their data. So the other thing is live open data publishing. That didn't exist when open data first started. It does exist today. So I know that Esri has that live open data publishing for spatial data, which is wonderful. But Anna, back to your point, like there weren't laws, policies, AI registries, that type of thing when open data first started. So now it's like we're kind of getting it right after the fact sort of thing. So would I do it all over again the same way? Yes, because of the value that it's brought forward. I wouldn't want to wait this long to get all these things and then do open data, but I just wish those things came first. That's all.
Some great points. You know what? It reminds me a lot of when the web itself first came out, right? It was the wild, wild west.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
and
exactly.
It just got to mature. I do see that we have a question that's come in. And the question is, what about public education that places a focus on STEM and the Ontario government's inclusion of digital twins to promote innovation in public infrastructure renewal? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, if I can jump in on that. So just a quick point about, I've been studying smart cities a lot over the last few years, and I just have to call out to Estonia. I mean, I think they're the most advanced smart city on the planet, smart country, if you will. And they have education, digital education baked into like very, very early on in a student's career. And I think that's absolutely critical for us to move forward on that. Sorry, Tracey, I interrupted you. I apologize.
No, that's okay. Open data goes back to the 1800s, Steve, with the meteorological
1800s?
societies. Yes, the meteorological societies were the first.
No kidding, wow.
To all meteorological societies around the world that existed at the time. These were the early days of the emergence of societies and of scientific societies. To say that if we're going to be able to talk about weather and meteorology, we all have to standardize, we all have to cooperate, we all have to collaborate. And then shortly after that, you start seeing the whole idea of the open aspects of science, where you have peer review and collaboration, you share your methodology. That was also like 1930s. And so the concepts of open and of open data and of sharing your data really goes back quite a long time. And that's why I bring these guys up, because they were part of the meteorological societies back in the day. So if you think every 15 years for International Polar Year, that's twice they've had International Polar Year. So that's 100 years of open data, open specification, semantic interoperability. So it is true that what happened with open data, you had a different group of actors come in. The web shows up, and then the social web shows up, and then suddenly you have app developers who are, forgive me, young dudes who didn't know much about spatial data or science for that matter, but they were interested in apps. And so the conversation shifted from science and these open areas to apps and to administrative data. With regards to registries, it is true that registries come later. It's like cart before the horse. But some of the things that we were talking about with corporate registries, for instance, many countries have had those for a long time. And, back in defense of what Anna's saying, governments ought to have an inventory of what they buy and what they apply. And a registry, in a way, it's a simplified, sorry, Anna, it's a very simplified take on it that I'm saying here. They ought to have at least a list, which is not a registry, but at least a list so that they're not all buying the same thing twice. So that's just to finish that thought. In terms of the question, I don't know what your name is, Jonathan, but one of the great, your last name is, but one thing I did forget was procurement. So should cities and the province of Ontario do like the Infrastructure Smart City Challenge, and in their calls include openness as part of the process and open data, then there is a carrot to incentivize the acquisition or the submissions of digital twins that might have more of those open characteristics. So thank you for reminding me of procurement, because I think that that's a place that's really important. In terms of STEM, listen, we just have to get the kids to count, man. Like if you saw the state of high school right now, like we just got to get that going. And if you saw the state of universities, like, oh, okay, we just got to get them learning how to write. And then, you know, we can bring these broader constructs into STEM, although I teach these courses in culture, technology, and society, but the procurement piece I think is a nice key. Thank you. Thanks for the great question.
Yeah, awesome. I have to say, you know what, just literacy, it came up before, right? It's really about you don't have to be a coder, it's the literacy aspect.
Yes.
And it's like numerical literacy, data literacy, digital literacy, like all of those basics, right? So I'm just seeing, there is another.
Did you have a response, Anna, to that one?
Yeah, I just wanted to add critical data literacy.
Yes.
And not like beyond that is just like zooming out again to be like, what systems are this data a part of? And what does that mean for me? Do I care about this data? How does it affect people if it's open? Do people want it open, or is it just who wants it open? I've been thinking more about like, there's like, what are we measuring? What are we not measuring? The feedback that, you know, gets left out from the public, how do we include that to say like, we're not opening that stuff, but why? At least we have a list. So I'm just, even with procurement, just one point around the list, back to this AI registry list, also having the free software trials there. So we're getting into this more complex, more advanced, digitized way of governing and just doing things, adopting tech or not. And so much of that slips between the cracks. Like there is no procurement for software trials. So, but they're really important because they get business intelligence and data analytics from governments without, you know, maybe their own directors or bosses knowing that they tried this out. They go to a demo or an expo, they get the stuff and try it out, and they say like yes or no. But that never really gets tracked anywhere. And that is super important because we've had a big case in Canada and around the world around Clearview AI, the facial recognition company that scraped billions of images. It's ongoing with you know, trials from all these federal governments around the world. They don't really care. They're, you know, US bound. That's the jurisdictional geographic issue is something else to consider. So again, there's these moments of even creating a list that is in Canada and how that would affect or benefit others, because these technologies aren't just developed, deployed, and used here, they're used elsewhere. And we have to make the global connection and that sort of interoperability of carrying outside of Canadian concerns or going down, like from the national down. We need to go from the national to international and see like how data brokers that are Canadian are affecting other countries. Because like, it's not like it's just us, oh, we're the victim of data brokers that are international. So I try to bring that sort of change in thinking, even when we look at critical data literacy, for example.
So thanks for that, because critical, those are my courses, right? So my courses are critical data studies. And this year, I finally, after 7 years of working on it, will be in computer science teaching data science ethics in society. And this year was the first experiment with computer scientists, and it was a blast. And they did fantastic projects. So, you know, we're now finally getting to that point. Even the computer science departments are going, ooh, maybe we need to have critical thinking in our programs and ethics in our programs. But, you know, on the flip side, the critical theorists often don't know how the tech works too. So it's you know, both sides have issues to learn from each other. Anyway, sorry, short intervention.
Steve, did you have something you were about to chime in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Anna's point. Yeah, I do feel that like open data really requires a global conversation to take us to the next level. I do fear a little bit that the speed and the scale of digitization is going to move past us. And my fear is that, and I think Tracey alluded to this, that won't be open. And I worry about that, right? So some of the things that I see, is the digitization of the road corridor. And like to a level that's well beyond what any city has today. And like globally too, in order for CV2X to be fully functional and have like feature-rich use cases for safety and a whole bunch of other things. But that data may not be open. It may not come from an authoritative source, which also worries me a little bit as well. And I also think that on Anna's point, like we need legal folks in the room to almost like keep up with and help unify laws around the globe, because data in one country might not abide to the legal framework in another country, and that's going to be really problematic, I think. Like what happens when your car drives from Canada into the United States and you're using V2X technology, shiny new car, greatest technology, and suddenly some legal piece says, oh no, you can't do that. Does your service just shut off? I mean, we really need to think about these things going forward. I think this is important.
I agree that whole idea of self-driving vehicles, when you've seen some of the road networks overlaid, it's like, oh my goodness, right? I don't want
next gen stuff. It is definitely next gen stuff. And the human experience of traveling from A to B will be far safer, far more efficient, and faster as well. So that's coming. But are we ready for it? Yeah, like from a digital standpoint.
AI just arrived here for the masses, and I don't think we're ready for it, right? You know what, Tracey, your point about we got to get them writing papers, and I'm going, oh, isn't that what ChatGPT is going to be used for? Not that I want to go down that road, right? But my goodness. So as we ponder our open future, everyone, you know what? What's your final moment? If everybody, or your final thoughts, if everybody could take, a minute and sum up what you've heard today, that'd be wonderful. And we'll go back to our speaker order. So Anna, 1 minute, how do you sum it up?
Okay, well, I just wanted to start with Steve's point around his worry around speed and scale of digitization and how that won't be open. And I will start with saying that I have an existential crisis every day looking at AI governance, since you've mentioned ChatGPT, and we were kind of thinking about it. But not only that, I mean, I didn't even mention our draft AI and Data Act. That is a kind of a catastrophe at the moment. So how do we, make sure we do legislation right? We bring in more voices to the table. We do not exclude. We realize that and accept and embrace that democracy is messy and slow, and we need patience. To Nadi's point from last session, we do need patience for this, for the public sector, but the public sector also needs patience with us. And if we say enough that this, draft or bill isn't good because we did have 0 public consultations, let's start over. I know this stuff is fast, but I don't want to do it wrong and then go back and then this stuff advance even more, and then it becomes this like murky mess. So this is not really a sum, but it's more of, how do we slow down and actually organize and look at rights collectively and get out of the sort of individual notions of, what works for us in, as a soul like person, and think of us collectively. And this will allude to things around climate change, which again, for me, AI, like it cannot, our physical systems will not be able to support the large amount of energy that AI models, foundation models require. So we might just like, the earth might just be like, bye. Like, and again, I'm trying to have open futures in mind, but this is why, again, we need to have bravery. We need to get out of this, historical, archaic, secretive culture of governments that we've inherited, and move forward to something more open and brave and honest, and bring the private sector along. So maybe Steve, you can build on that.
Absolutely. So I just got five points I want to make here in moving forward. The first one is, as I mentioned earlier, the adoption of common data models, and there's different ways of getting at that. The second one is wrapping that in data governance. And so coming to Telus, one of the things I've been embraced with is we have an entire data governance team for Telus. I mean, we're a very large organization. We're like 70,000 people globally. And so you would expect that they do have that. We also have the second largest privacy office in Canada. And so, which is wonderful because we've got that sort of nailed down, and we can help governments ease into that process because it is challenging and it is difficult. The third point is around government cloud adoption. And my worry there is the scale of this. So, I mean, in Ontario, we have 444 municipalities. So staff are spread incredibly thin. And there's a lot of scale in moving that forward. And it's not just moving to the cloud, but it's moving to the cloud within that common data ontology, wrapped in data governance, all bundled in. So I think there needs to be like a generation of scale to do this entirely different. And my thinking there is moving along towards a data trust to do that. So every city just plugs into the data trust and they're good to go. And all of that other side is already figured out for them. That's probably the easiest way and the best way to move that forward. The fourth point I have is live open data publishing. And that would come naturally through a data trust. I mean, I just find it ridiculous that you go to a source system, you export data, clean it, and then publish it somewhere else. I mean, we have to get past that. That's old thinking, and we have to move forward on that because the future will be, real-time data as well. And, that's not going to work. And the last point is around federated open data. So we need that consistent experience right across Canada, no matter what you're searching for, no matter what you're doing on that front. The outcomes that we need to strive for are this. We need to strive for improved data currency, improve data consistency right across Canada, improve metadata that is federated, and ultimately work towards a wonderful unified experience for both consumption and the publishing of open data for everyone in Canada.
A great point, Steve. I got to say, earlier today, I heard the term capacity divide. And I went, wow, that resonates, right? I always thought of the digital divide, but for public servants, it's the capacity divide.
And, 444 municipalities, that's going to be a challenge to move into the next 5 years, because I think the next 5 years are going to be nothing like we've seen in the last 5 years. I think we're really getting to that moment of digitization of everything. And therefore, I think there needs to be very large investments in data required at all levels of government.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Tracey, over to you. Final thoughts.
I put a couple of links in to the Arctic Spatial Data Infrastructure and GEOS based on what you're talking about, Steve. Those models exist in that space, just not in our space, in the open data space yet. What am I thinking? How do we govern vast machines? Because these are vast machines. Paul Edwards wrote the book called Vast Machines when he was looking at meteorology. And that includes, data, tools, techniques, standards, artificial intelligence, the works. You think of the globe and all of the things that deliver us the weather. It's not one thing, it's a whole bunch of interconnected systems and systems interconnected with each other. How do we govern a digital planet? Remember the digital Earth? That's what Google was supposed to be. It was supposed to be our digital Earth. Well, here we are in a digital Earth context. How do we govern? Are we governing from nation states, or are we governing in a different way, right? COVID showed us how different nation states govern their digital data and system space around the control of people during the pandemic. China, France, Italy, Sweden, Canada, etc. All different models, all the same issue, all governing a pandemic. How do we deal with that in these vast machines? There's another concept that's called hyperobjects, and it's to suggest that how do we describe these things? That's Timothy Morton, and Timothy Morton talks about, if you will, a vast machine or these vast systems that we put a name onto them: smart city, digital twin, spatial data infrastructure, but they're not a thing. They're, a loosely interconnected, content and context attributes that are related to each other in vast systems that have local instantiations at multiple scales across jurisdictions and across sectors. Or maybe just to simplify, how do we govern infrastructure, and open data being a component of infrastructure, being a component of smart cities and digital twins, right? It's not the thing, but it's a component of that discourse. And how do we take all the discourse we have, open science, open data, open access, open specifications, open standards, interoperability, all of those things as constructs, along with the politics that both Anna and I were talking about, and how do we have that conversations at a systems level? I put GEOS in there as a link because it's the Global Earth Observation Systems of Systems. They are doing that in a sector that we don't think about often, which is very private, but yet they are open and have adopted many of these principles. So how do we shape shift some of that you inspired us with earlier, Connie? How do we shape shift these governance models into other sectors? So for me, that's what I would love to see. We can't just think at the technical level here of open data anymore. We need to think of it as part of a broad system, and we need to bring the ethos of openness into all of these systems. And this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for convening this, Connie.
Yeah. It's been awesome. You know what? You guys have been fantastic panelists. I'm going to call you all the good and the brave, right? As we face this open future together, right? We got AI, smart cities, technology, and data. Oh my, right? The cliche, right? That's quite the interesting yellow brick road that we're traveling down to bridge this divide. I really hope that, we get citizens the outcomes that they need out of this, right? Referring to some of the words that Ashley said earlier, right? Challenging us, it's right. Will all of this do what it needs to do for people? And can we bring the people along, right? You know what? It's so easy to forget. We got to bring them along. We need to do a better job, I think, engaging not only the citizens and the people, but each other, because Tracey, my gosh, you just mentioned a ton of stuff, right? Anna, Steve, that I'm going to have to research because it's so hard to keep up on all of this. How do we bring each other all along, right? It's going to be quite a challenge, but I think we're all up to it. So, some closing thoughts that I have, I don't have closing thoughts. I have closing questions, right? When I thought about this, it's like, where will we be next year? Right? We've been at this for a few years. Are we even starting to bridge the gap, or are we still at the beginning before the gap? Do you know what? I'm not so sure. Or maybe there's multiple bridges that we have to cross, and we're doing it all at different times. That we'll have to wait and see. We don't know the future. The future of open data. Awesome. Well, I'm going to leave that for everybody to consider. Where are we? Are we further along today? Right? A long time ago, Bianca Wiley said to me, pauses and things like that are meant to be. And I have to accept that. We're not at a pause, but I think we are in the middle of the gap. We have not got to the end of our journey. And you know what? Maybe we never will. Maybe it's one of those endless journeys. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us on this good journey. And I'm optimistic that we actually will move closer to good governance, and all of these wonderful collaborative open government efforts, right, will come to fruition for all of us. I'm that Pollyanna of open data and open government. I heard so many creative ideas today that I do believe, despite our discussion on fear and all of that, that our future is bright. Look at the collective energy in this room wanting to do more, right? And move forward. And I'd also like to thank, everybody, good wouldn't happen without everybody here talking about this all together. It wouldn't happen without the good team and the partners. I'd like to thank all of the speakers and our organizing committee and the good board of directors. I'd also like to thank Keith, unfortunately had to jet early, as he says, for being our MC, Telus Business, Misa Ontario, Be Spatial, the Community Foundation of Canada, Open North, and Code for Canada. And I hope that everybody continues their good journey with you. It's been a wonderful experience to spend this day with you all. I'm going to go over now back to Yuri.
Yes. Hello, Connie, and thank you for that. You saved me a couple of minutes in thanking everybody. But I also wanted to thank the audience for their participation and contribution and asking the questions they did. And we don't have all the answers to those questions, which is not surprising because we are on the journey, as you said. So I just wanted to let people know that this is our annual conference, our 10th annual conference, and it's been a real success from a content point of view and participation. But we continue our journey with additional things that are happening. Next week is International Open Government Week, and GOOD will be having an open unconference. In other words, we'll set up a meeting, I think probably next Wednesday, where the discussion is going to be driven by whoever drops in, not by any agenda that we have. We also have, because people were disappointed that we didn't do in person this year, we're going to have a GOOD open house happening mid-June in Brampton. So all of those folks that are interested in getting together and tossing out whatever it is you want to discuss, we've got that opportunity coming up in mid-June. And I wanted to tell you that we've already started planning our October forum. And this year, the focus will be on smart cities, AI, and data. How about that combination? So without further ado, and I also wanted to thank Keith McDonald for the masterful Master of Ceremonies job that he did. And Connie and all of the moderators and the speakers and panelists, it was just sensational. And we'll try and get the information out to the people who registered, that is the videos and PowerPoints, etc., as soon as we can, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. Okay, so with that, I bid you all adieu, and thanks everybody, and have a great weekend. Bye now.